I recently returned from the NAB show in Las Vegas, and the lens you're looking at me on right now is one of the best things that I saw at the show. Now, if you don't know what the NAB show is, it's generally a video-centric show. NAB stands for National Association of Broadcasters, and all the major camera manufacturers and all the major lens manufacturers have stuff there. There's also a number of new releases, but because a lot of these companies do photo and video, you are getting some photography stuff as well. And this lens is a good example of something that is really more of a photo-centric lens than a video-centric lens. Now, it's a 35mm f1.2, and I'm shooting with it right now, and I'm shooting it at f1.2. Normally in a situation like this, you would stop it down because I'm in a beautiful landscape situation. You'd want to show that landscape behind me, but I kind of wanted to show you what it looked like at f1.2. I'll put some links in the description down below to the best prices I could find on the lens and the couple places I know will have it in stock because this is a new release lens. Viltrox had no say in the making of this video, and this is not a paid or sponsored video, but Viltrox did provide the lens to me at no cost to myself. And a couple of things that really jumped out at me about this lens. First of all, is the sharpness starting right from f1.2. It's not uncommon with these more budget-friendly lenses that open, wide open to things like f1.2 or f0.95, that you get a situation where they are kind of character lenses at f1.2. This thing is extremely sharp, and there's hardly any difference between f1.2 and f8. And if we look at the MTF charts, what you'll find is although it does improve as you stop it down, from f1.2, it is still extremely sharp. And I think from f1.2 to f1.4, you do get a little bit of jump in resolution, but it is just extremely sharp throughout the whole range, and you wouldn't have to really worry about using it at any given aperture. The other thing is it is very sharp in the corners right from f1.2 again. Now, one thing you will notice about this lens is it does exhibit a bit of vignette, but I don't think the vignette is as bad as most f1.2 lenses out there. In fact, it has actually quite low vignette for a lens that goes to f1.2. Now, as you stop it down through the range, the vignette does improve and those corners do get a little bit brighter, but I find this lens does hold its vignette throughout the entire range. So even all the way down to f8 or f11, you do still have some level of vignette in your images, which is something I don't mind because in photography, I generally add vignette to my images anyways. The other thing that jumped out at me was the color and contrast I get out of the lens straight from f1.2. Once again, a lot of lenses at f1.2, they're a little bit lower contrast and maybe you lose a little bit of punch in those colors and you get a little bit more of a vintage image. But with this lens at f1.2, which when you're shooting at night, you might want to do so you get that really low ISO in those low light conditions, what you'll find is you still have a huge amount of contrast, really maximum contrast. And the other thing that you have is you have these really punchy, super saturated colors. And that's something that really jumped out at me about this lens, is the way it renders colors and the level of contrast and saturation in those images. And at times, particularly at night where I had interesting lights or different colored lights, what I found is just looking at the image on the back of the camera or the JPEGs right out of the camera, it really kind of looked like an edited photo already. So I think this is also a lens that's going to suit someone who really doesn't want to do a whole lot of editing in their photos. For some reason, this lens gives them kind of a finished image like straight out of camera. Looking at the flare performance, it is extremely well controlled right from f1.2, and I never ran into a situation where the light was coming from the side or hitting the lens in a way that it completely washed out or desaturated the image. And when there is flare in the image, it looks really, really nice. I will also mention that at f1.2, when you have bright points of light in your scene, you get this very mild diffused kind of look, almost looks like a low strength diffusion filter. Now, this is going to be very much personal preference. I think it looks great, but if you don't like that look, you can always stop it down to f1.4, f1.8, f2. This goes away very quickly. I think flare performance and this blooming of the highlights effect is really very much personal preference. So just look at the images and you decide how they look to you. The other place you often see these super fast lenses suffer is chromatic aberration, and this thing is ultra clean. Particularly in the in-focus areas, I couldn't get it to show me any normal chromatic aberration. That's that in-focus chromatic aberration. Even in high backlit scenes or shooting on a test chart, I found that the image had zero purple fringing or zero color fringing whatsoever. I did find that if I worked really hard, maybe I could bring on the slightest amount of longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is a slight change in color cast before and after the plane of focus. But I really had to work to bring that on in any normal given situation, in any of the normal photos I took, and I've taken thousands of photos with this lens. I didn't see anything that really gave me any problems as far as longitudinal chromatic aberration goes. And the other thing this lens did really well was render really soft out of focus areas and had a really nice transition from the in focus area to the out of focus area. This is another place that sometimes these lenses suffer, particularly the ones that they're trying to make ultra sharp. And I don't know what it is. I think it is the type of elements, the extra ED elements they often use in these lenses to really get rid of chromatic aberration and give you maximum sharpness. Sometimes you get this kind of crazy background, but this lens has got none of that. It is a super soft, super clean, really nice backdrop to whatever you've got in focus. And I think that's pretty important with a lens like this, particularly one that's going to go to f1.2, because when you take a blurry background portrait or environmental shot or even a product shot where you try to isolate a subject and draw the viewer's eye to that thing in the frame, often most of the image is out of focus. You might only have 15 or 20% of the image that is in focus. So most of your image is an out of focus image. And with this one, you're going to get very smooth, very clean, very nice background blur. One place the lens exhibits acceptable but imperfect performance is when it comes to focus breathing. And this is when the image zooms in and out when you focus on objects near or far away from you. And this performance is noticeably better than Sony's f1.4 G Master lens and is definitely acceptable for photography, but may cause a problem for some video shooters. Also keep in mind that Sony's G Master lens does now have focus breathing compensation in the newer cameras. So although that lens does focus breathe quite heavily, you won't notice it in your actual video footage because the camera fixes that up for you. The other thing I should note about the out of focus areas is it does have a 11-bladed aperture, which for the most part keeps the bokeh reasonably round and smooth. There is a slight geometry if you punch in and look at it at like 100% magnification, but in general, at normal viewing distances, all the bokeh balls are going to look nice and round. Wide open, you will find that at the edges of frame, you do get a little bit of a lemon-shaped cutting, which almost gives you a little bit of a swirly bokeh effect, which I don't mind, but I think this is very much a personal preference. But overall, the bokeh balls are nice and smooth, and for the most part, round in most situations. The other place the lens performed really well was close-up image quality. Now, the close-up image quality was very sharp, and I found the images to be just as sharp as the ones at infinity or further distances. What I did find is the close focus wasn't as close as I would like. It's around 13 inches or 34 centimeters. I would really love that to be just a little bit closer, but the minimum focus distance wasn't bad or terrible or anything like that. And because you get so much resolution, if you're shooting on one of these high megapixel sensors, like I'm shooting on the 61 megapixel A7R5, you can crop in. It is going to give you a bit more of a magnification that way. But I do wish the minimum focus distance was just that little bit closer. The lens does exhibit a little bit of distortion. It is a mustache distortion pattern, and at this stage, there aren't in-camera corrections with the lens. I do have an early copy of the lens, and they don't have a profile correction in Lightroom. I expect that both of these things will come, and it won't be any problem. But right now, sort of right out of the camera, without any corrections, you do get a noticeable mustache pattern distortion, particularly at the very edges of frame, which is something that can be very hard to correct. So I think it is important that we get a profile correction that either works in camera or one that works in Lightroom or both. Looking at the autofocus performance and starting with photography, anytime there was a box around something and it said that that was going to be the focal point, I found that was in focus. And I wouldn't say that I missed a single shot. Now we're just talking about general purpose photography. This isn't sports and action or wildlife, but for general purpose photography, I had pretty much a 100% hit rate. Having a look at the video autofocus performance, because this lens has VCM motors, the autofocus can be very quick. And I think it's important to go into the camera and tune in the sensitivity and the speed of the focus pulls. And I wouldn't use anything above a 3 in the Sony cameras. And this gave me the most natural looking focus pulls. This also helped avoid any pulsing or hunting where the autofocus motor went too fast and overshot the subject and then came back. So just make sure you dial in those autofocus speed settings for the best results in video. At the time of shooting this video, it's available in E-mount only, but I do expect that we are going to see it in Z-mount in the future. This seems to be what they're doing this lab series of lenses. This is the second in the lab series. The first one was a 135 f1.8. That was one of the best lenses I've ever tested. 35 f1.2. Also one of the best lenses I've ever tested. They just brought out that 135 for the Nikon Z-mount, so I think we will see this 35 come out for the Z-mount as well. This is part of this lab series of lenses, which they are intending to be a professional series of lenses. And when you take it out of the box, it feels absolutely professionally built. It's an all metal body. It's got a polished metal lens mount. It has two programmable function buttons. It has a display on the top of the lens, which shows you the focus distance that you're currently at, as well as your current aperture. It has the ability to click and de-click the aperture ring, which I really like. And it also has an autofocus manual focus switch on the lens. I think one of the big questions people are going to have is, should I buy this lens or should I buy the Sony lens? And just comparing the two, at the current retail price, the Sony lens is going to be about $400 more. It only goes to f1.4 rather than f1.2, but the Sony is a smaller lens. And one of the advantages of the Sony lens is it does give you a higher frame rate in photography, something that the third-party lenses don't get you. This is just part of the way Sony has made the cameras work. The other thing is, both of these lenses have reasonably significant focus breathing, although I believe the Viltrox is a little bit better as far as the focus breathing performance goes. But the Sony lens does have focus breathing compensation. If in most of the cameras now, I don't think all of them, maybe some of the little bit older ones don't have it, but in most of the cameras you get focus breathing compensation, which is not going to work with the Viltrox lens. And I do know some people that have both of these lenses and have tested them side by side, and testing them at f1.4, they are both very, very similar. There's almost no difference in sharpness whatsoever. And then you get the bonus mode in the Viltrox. It can go all the way to f1.2. Ultimately, I think this is a great lens at a fair price. It's something you could use to shoot weddings or events or street photography. At f1.2, you are going to get extremely good low light performance, and it is an extremely sharp lens. You could use it for landscape, for video, just about anything. The only caveat I have with the lens is the weight. It is quite a big, chunky, heavy lens, particularly compared to the Sony. Now, the Sony only goes to f1.4. This one goes to f1.2, but you will notice the weight difference. But if that isn't a deal breaker for you, then I could easily recommend this lens.